Great.
So, hello everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on this lunchtime webinar. I'm Hannah, I'm the Project Engagement Officer for Calverley Old Hall, and I'm here with Diane today. So Diane's going to be running our webinar for us. Diane is from Green Footsteps Limited, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the project, a little bit about her involvement with the project and sustainability more broadly. So firstly, just a couple of little housekeeping things before we start. There is a Q&A box at the bottom, so if you want to ask any questions at any point, if you pop them in the Q&A box, and I'll put them to Diane at the end of the webinar. If you'd like to put captions on, there's also a little box that says show captions with CC above it, so if you click on that one, and that should put the captions on for you. The webinar is going to be recorded. The recording's already started, so if anybody needs to catch up later on, they can do, and we'll be releasing this one as we did with the last one afterwards, and we'll be sending the recording round to you all. So I think that's pretty much it in the housekeeping scheme of things. Just to sort of note that if anybody does need to ask any questions, as I said, just pop them in the Q&A box there at the end, and put them in the Q&A box and I'll ask Diane at the end. But obviously they might occur to you as you're going along, so just pop them in there at any point, and we'll be monitoring the Q&A box as we go along. Thanks again to you all for joining us, and a big thanks to the Lottery Fund for actually funding this for us and funding the whole project. So it's been a really brilliant project to be a part of, so hopefully you will enjoy the webinar. So over to Diane.
Great. Thanks for joining us, everybody. My name is Diane Hubbard, and I'm going to talk about the sustainability side of Calverley Old Hall, which is ongoing as a project at the moment. Before I start, right, I'd just like to introduce myself. I operate under Green Footsteps. My background is not in building conservation. I'm an engineer originally, and most of the work that I do relates to looking at energy in buildings. So this particular project is slightly different from the typical work that I'm doing. So I'm used to putting numbers on buildings. My academic research area is in relation to older buildings, particularly in relation to ventilation and moisture. But I'm also a passive house consultant, so sort of melding some very different things, really. So in terms of a little bit of background on Calverley to start off with, the project is still in progress at this moment. The building itself goes back to around 1100. Landmark Trust have owned the building since 1980. It's a mixture of ages of the building, as you can see from the photographs, and over time it's been used for different purposes. From the 19th century, it was divided up into relatively small dwellings, and clearly that the project now is opening up into the larger spaces again that had been subdivided. So we've got an assortment of photographs here. We've got a photograph at the bottom right prior to the work being started, and also some typical space that was inside, and some photographs of stages of the project as it is now. So what I'm going to be talking about today is covers how the sustainability aspect of this project has actually been scoped. So I'm really going to be talking about the process that we've been through and the elements that have been examined, rather than particular details. I'm aware, there are other presentations in this series which are going into particular aspects of the building, but this presentation should be viewed as sort of an overview, really, of the things that have been considered in this case, and would merit consideration on other projects where that's within Landmark Trust or with other organisations, when you're considering all aspects of sustainability in relation to a particular project. So this project was scoped quite some time ago. It's been ongoing for a number of years in terms of detailing. I got involved in it in 2021, and things have changed quite a lot in that period in how we talk about aspects of sustainability, and particularly on the carbon side of things. It's moved forward a great deal. So bear that in mind as I'm going through some of the detail, that our perspective has changed considerably since this was scoped sort of 3 or 4 years ago, the sustainability side of things. So I'm going to talk about carbon impact initially, aspects of sustainability relating to the building itself, the work taking place on the building, the wider site, so beyond the building, but within the site itself, aspects relating to building users, and really then things that have come from this particular project. So both in terms of reviewing the process, but also really things we can learn for the future. So I think one thing to consider when we start talking about carbon impact is to understand the context that landmarks sort of sit within. If you're thinking of carbon impact, well, personally, I tend to leap towards energy use in buildings, but that's maybe just the person that I am. But there are clearly lots of things to consider. Our environment is clearly changing. The trust has to consider, the implications of what it does itself as an organisation. So, in terms of how it uses its office space, how it uses vehicles, all those sort of things. So, in effect, the business bit of the trust itself. We've got the property users, and the impact they have on the building, the impact on the wider environment, their carbon impact. We've also got Landmark Trust's view of its supporters and what its role is with supporters in terms of not only they might be using building users, but also, what impact could the Landmark Trust have on those supporters in terms of assisting them to perhaps change their perspective on things and the supporters' own carbon impact. And then we've got the environment around the buildings. They may be urban, they may be rural, but both the local community in terms of the occupants are immediately around it, but also on a wider basis, of the term community. So there are all sorts of things that do need to be considered when we're starting to think about the carbon implications. And underlying all this, Landmark Trust, the basic principle of there is a building that may, its original purpose may be no longer required. So the principle of taking an existing building that might either already be in disrepair or unlikely to be used in the future, and repurposing it as something else. So that in itself, reusing that building has, it has a positive impact, but there is clearly often historic fabric there, which has to be treated with consideration. We also have the situation that we've got climate change implications. So things like the intensity of rainfall is increasing in certain locations. So, the ability of a building to deal with that rainfall, whether that be the intensity of the rain hitting walls or the rainwater goods. So we're really thinking way beyond energy use and carbon numbers directly. We also have to think about, specifically in Landmark Trust's case, the spheres of influence that they have. I've already mentioned about the fact that, you know, the buildings are mainly protected, they're mainly protected buildings. And so there are limitations on what can be done. It's not a situation where you're building, you know, it's a new building and everything can be dealt with in the most carbon efficient way. You have a building there that has particular characteristics that we need to work with. And so the sphere of influence on that building can be restricted. We're also dealing, because the properties are a rented property, short-term holiday lets. We've got the behaviour of the building users that's sort of outside the control of the trust. And so that's quite difficult to deal with in terms of when you're thinking about carbon implications. You can't dictate to the building users how they choose to use the building. You can try and guide them, but actually a big part of that is actually outside the control of the Landmark Trust. So with those, they're clearly two key areas where if you were looking at something like a private, a normal household, you'd have more scope usually to control those items. So really, it points a lot to where one of the areas where there is a biggest level of control by the trust actually falls to consideration of heating, because you have a choice there of how the building is heated and the fuel that is used. Clearly, that's going to depend on particular aspects of the property and availability of sources. But that it really highlights that there are quite difficult things for the Landmark Trust to deal with because of those restrictions of the building itself and the behaviour of the building users being out with the control of the trust. So, thinking a little bit more about the building itself and how the sustainability policy was actually outlined. So clearly using materials that are sustainable. Now that sustainable is a really difficult word, isn't it? You know, we really should talk about more specifics. You know, using materials which offer carbon sequestration, that have the right characteristics in terms of behaviour in relation to moisture, that are compatible with the building, is really what we're talking about here. But working with the building without impacting the key characteristics and features for which the building is actually valued. So that word sustainability clearly encompasses quite a lot. At Calverley, there's been great emphasis on trying to reduce the energy loss from the building fabric, but appreciating that there are characteristics of the building that do need to be brought through. So you're working within some quite difficult limitations in some cases, but bringing as much into that building in terms of reducing the energy loss as possible through improving the fabric where appropriate. One thing that it's been really fascinating, wonderful and satisfying to do is to reuse materials from within the building and repurposing them for different things. So valuing everything that has really had to be removed or temporarily removed from the building, and then considering where it can be put back in. I think this is something that generally, you know, I'm speaking personally here, we don't always think about, and valuing every piece of material that's within that building, the history of the building, the stages it's gone through. You can see that that it's being taken from you know, a series of small divided dwellings, and there's clearly quite a lot of material involved in each of those spaces, and making sure that that material can be reused where possible. So that's been an important part of the process, and as a result, that has quite a big implication for the amount of waste that's generated and had to be removed from site. So thinking around what the materials that have actually come out of the building and having sufficient space to store those materials under the right conditions until they're ready to be repurposed has been important. And one thing that it was scoped in the original policy, but it could work better potentially in the future, is the materials that perhaps can't be reused on this particular site being used elsewhere or upcycled by others. It's really a case of valuing all of the materials that are on the site already and trying to reuse them wherever possible. Now, thinking about the heating side of things, Calverley has a ground source heat pump from boreholes. It has underfloor heating. Now, in terms of you know, having a good conditions for the building as a whole, clearly a heat pump is great. Particularly combined with underfloor, where you've got relatively low temperatures, so you're really charging the thermal mass of the building. In terms of a ground source as opposed to an air source heat pump, you've got an increased level of efficiency, but also in terms of intrusion on the site, it doesn't sort of intrude on the aesthetics of the building or the wider site as a whole. So that's something to be bearing in mind. As part of the process, the lighting, the appliances, ensuring everything is as low energy as possible. So use of PIR lighting, making sure that we are reducing the amount of light pollution from the building. These have all been part of the overall process. Now, thinking beyond the stage that the building is at the moment, Landmark have a policy of using furnishings second-hand furnishings, repurposing items using existing fabrics, and that all forms part of the wider needs from a sustainability point of view. So thinking about beyond the building itself, so looking at the wider site, we're really thinking then of things that, you know, even at a normal domestic scale, we've got our head around. So trying to encourage composting as much as possible, trying to make the site, which is in an urban location, though it does have garden areas around it, but a relatively restricted site, trying to make sure that the garden is designed from a wildlife point of view. When we were scoping this, there was a lot of conversations about trying to encourage it as a local community facility, looking at options on how to maintain the garden. So with the stage that the project's at the moment, there's clearly some detail of what's actually happening to be absolutely confirmed, but there's any open space around the building is clearly something that can offer both opportunities in terms of sequestering carbon, increasing biodiversity. There is a whole world of options out there that really enhance the carbon side of and the carbon side of the site as a whole, and also sustainability in the wider sense beyond carbon. So building users, if we think a bit about how we are talking about that, transport is key. I've mentioned that the property is in an urban location. It's practical for guests to travel by public transport to the site. If we think about through the process of the works on the building itself, encouraging the workers on the site and any meetings to take place through people using public transport is important. Thinking beyond this to when the building is in use by guests, looking at encouraging people to travel by public transport, car charging, EV car charging port is an important part of it. Making people aware of the options that they've got. Communication of those options is important as well. We often, I suppose, we're creatures of habit, and we don't necessarily think beyond how we've travelled to properties in the past. A lot of Landmark Trust properties are in rural locations where the only option is by car. So making sure that people understand that public transport is an option to actually arrive at the property. So communication is part of that transport policy. Water management. So both in terms of general water use and from a carbon point of view, the implications of hot water use are actually greater, where the greatest component of the energy and carbon implications are. The hot water is delivered through the ground source heat pump, but making sure that water management has taken place. So flow rates on taps and showers, that whole process has been examined as part of the design. A little bit more down to earth, recycling policy. It's really important. So discouraging, for example, that the space within the building that can be used by used as a community space, discouraging the use of disposable cups and encouragement of use of crockery, really, alongside trying to make sure that guests are recycling glass and aluminium and everything else as we all try to at home. So really thinking about moving forward from Calverley. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things is that this project, the sustainability side, was scoped in 2021 and had been talked about for quite some time before that. So our perspectives have really changed in that time. We're all talking about carbon more. We're better informed on that subject. We don't need to sort of continually try to explain what climate change is to people and the potential implications of that. So, it's clearly understood that things have changed and things have moved forward. And an important part of it is to review really the process. There were things that we were talking about then, which I suppose have come to the fore, and other things are sort of proving of less significance. Some things have proved quite realistic to do, some things are maybe more aspirational. So reviewing the whole process of the supporting sustainability, literally, needs to be continually reviewed, and our perspective will also change in the future. So part of it at the moment is to actually look back and to see what should be changed for the future, potentially for other projects. it's great that we have a BEng dissertation student on board for examining the process at Calverley Old Hall. And that would clearly be a key part of examining what should be considered for the future. Another thing that's that sort of come from this is trying to make sure that the surveyor team within the Landmark Trust appreciate that sustainability and energy is part of sort of an integral part of what they do. One part of that was some training that's taken place for the whole surveyor team, which was on sort of energy and on building some carbon primer stuff, and also some hands-on work on using the camera that the trust has, infrared camera that the trust has, and how you can use that to help them in their day-to-day work and help them to examine the buildings that they're responsible for. It's also helped to appreciate that there will be opportunities for energy saving measures and low carbon heating elsewhere. I've included a photograph here of the station agent's house in Manchester, which is in progress at this moment, where there has been an opportunity to include wall insulation alongside other measures within that building. So some buildings, it's going to be really difficult to make major changes within, or maybe they are not at a point where perhaps other works need to be done on that on those buildings. There clearly are opportunities where with other buildings where those opportunities need to be grasped at the appropriate point. Now, this might seem relatively trivial, but one thing that has come from it, it actually arose with the training that was done with the surveyors, was an appreciation of how many open flues, open fireplaces there are within Landmark Trust properties in general, and the energy consequence of those open fireplaces. I can speak from personal experience, having done quite a bit of research, academic research into the energy consequence from open fireplaces, but I don't think it's widely appreciated what those losses can be and the impact on the thermal comfort in older buildings for building users, whether that's within the trust or in just normal domestic properties. Particularly with some of the properties within the trust, there are large numbers of open fireplaces that have been retained, and clearly the problems with moisture buildup in flues has to be avoided, but there appear to be lots of opportunities where the airflow through the flue can be reduced through using devices such as chimney sheet. That chimney sheet has been chosen by the trust as the preferred device. It's a bat of a felted wool bat that can be put into the flue from the fireplace and easily removed if the fireplace needs to be used. But we're finding that there is a relatively large number of fireplaces in some properties, and they have an energy consequence for that building, and also an impact in terms of the occupants and their perception of comfort within those spaces. So don't underestimate the potential impact from a simple device such as that. The other thing that's arisen from this is an appreciation that there's merit in examining some buildings in more detail, and that helping to inform future decisions that might be made on the building. The property that's shown on this slide is Cavendish Hall, and I carried out an air tightness test on this building about a year ago, and as part of that, I was looking at what the general levels of ingress into the building were, where those locations were, and also areas where the building perhaps wasn't performing brilliantly, or identifying particular issues. Now, we're clearly dealing with a building that is has a high level of historic fabric in it, but there could be items within that building that could be relatively easily addressed, and this test has helped to identify those, and then that information can be sort of taken forward to allow decisions to be made in the future, and perhaps rethinking some of the thoughts on potentially what might be considered. If, for example, in that particular building, there were particular issues around some of the windows, and perhaps looking at carrying out some relatively minor works on those windows in order to reduce the unwanted airflow that came in through those windows without impacting the appearance of the windows. Could make some quite significant improvement. Okay, so that's sort of what I've really tried to do, is to talk about the process that we've been through. I appreciate I've not gone into significant amount of detail in anything, because it's such a broad range of items that we've actually considered as part of this. What I've hoped that I've presented is something that should hopefully offer a template for not only future landmark trust buildings, but something that may be more widely adopted as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Diane. That was really, really interesting. And we've had a few questions already in the Q&A box. If anybody's got any more questions, feel free to pop them in there, but we'll work through what we've got in there already. So the first question that we've got is actually from Alistair, that's asking, is the first floor also underfloor heating at Calverley?
That's a very good question. I would have to check my notes. Can I come back to you afterwards?
As far as I'm aware, Alistair, yes, I think it is. Certainly in the solar. And then Piers is just asking, could you give an example of where materials have been repurposed and how they've been reused?
Yeah, so those images that I showed before, those the steps, you know, if you think of timber, reusing it for flooring or steps, we've got examples of tiles that were down in one part of the building being floor tiles, being removed and reused elsewhere. So there's a whole range of materials that we're talking about there. Stonework being moved between different areas. So we're talking about a whole range of things. If it's think as widely as possible, really. I know it's a slight tangent, but at the other extreme, I was in a discussion before Christmas with somebody who was, in the case of a new building, basically looking at the pile of materials that they had and building the new building around that. Actually, it was Charlie Luxton was the person who the architect, you know, who has quite a high profile. And he said it was quite a, he felt it was quite a difficult process to do that, but actually we really do, we need to really value all of the materials that we have, everything, and not just grind something up and reuse it in a different state, but really valuing everything that we have. And I that's the way that I feel we have to move forward in the future.
Kate's just asking about insulation, so she's just asking to see if there's any more that she can hear about the insulation enhancements that we've had in Calverley.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the other presentations, do you want to just explain the other ones in the series?
Oh, the other questions?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. So, this presentation is one of several within the group. So
yeah, so we've done two. The other one was basically Karen, the architect for Calverley, that's sort of talked a little bit broadly about the building, talked a little bit about her approach to sort of designing for the building and the difficulties that she's had in getting around various issues within the building. And then there's yourself. And then we're in the process of planning. We might do a couple more afterwards, but at the moment those are the sort of two main ones. So Karen hasn't really covered much about insulation.
Oh, right, okay.
So if you
I was assuming
no, she did a little bit, but not anything in depth.
So maybe another one in the series is to go into the detail of that. Sorry, I was assuming it had been covered in her presentation on that. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
No, it's fine, don't worry.
So but yes, you're absolutely right in terms of the detail of the detail that's been put into it. So it's really outside the scope of this presentation, because the brief for me was to talk on it more widely, but it is important that that information is sort of communicated and available for people to use. So I'm sure it can be.
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit about it within Karen's presentation, Kate. So if you want to go back and rewatch that one, it's available on our website. So do have a look at that one and see if that answers your queries. And if not, just drop us an email on the Calverley email address. Alice is also asking, what would you have done differently if starting the project again, which is a really big question.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? I think that from my point of view, and I'm speaking personally here, rather than I'm not speaking on behalf of the trust. The thing that's really changed is our view on carbon since 2021, and sort of looking back at the original documents that and thought processes. I think if you're starting it now, actually that would be absolutely at the center. It was almost sort of a bit off to one side. It would be absolutely at the center, and rightly so. I think I do appreciate it's a difficult, when we're looking at historic fabric, it's really it is a real balancing act. And I have to say that I really, genuinely feel that Landmark Trust are really trying to understand the carbon side of it, and it's important that we do understand it, because thinking about a normal domestic client, it's very easy to just throw money at things if you've got the money, and maybe not think about the carbon in too much detail. But everything that we do, there is a carbon implication, and the worst situation is to do something and for it not to be effective, and that carbon is then spent, it's wasted, and that's almost as bad as, well, it's worse actually, because you've spent the carbon and you haven't got a benefit from it. And so the thought processes that the Landmark Trust are going through and trying to understand the buildings better to make sure that what they do works is really important. So putting carbon at the centre, I think, would be the biggest change, really. So it wouldn't be looking at different things around it, but looking at it in terms of where we're embedding more carbon in, what the measures are, what sort of measures they are, and the building energy use would be, personally, I would put them closer to the centre. But I'm speaking personally there rather than officially.
No, it's interesting, and it's also what you've learned from doing this as well.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
And then we've got Garance that's asking, are you intending to put any local public transport locations and frequencies in the property details in order to encourage leaving the car behind? Do you consider encouraging landmarkers to shop locally as a form of sustainability?
Yeah, so all that part of it's a key part. What I was sort of trying, sorry, I'm aware that the sun this is the only sunshine I've had, anyway. So I can't sort of bring the blind down while I'm talking. So do apologise about the sun. So yeah, it's when I sort of that slide I had originally, which sort of explained, the trust itself and what trusts do, offices, their own vehicles, the business sort of implications of it, the supporters, the building users. They have an important role in terms of communicating what they're doing to try and get other people thinking about what the others are doing personally. So it's starting a thought process, because we're creatures of habit. We don't tend to change what we do unless we're actually sort of stop and think about it. But life mainly just goes on, doesn't it? So it's an ideal opportunity to start people thinking about it. Because if you haven't been on a bus in ages, you don't know that they take contactless and you can hop on and off, and the bus times up here, and you buy your ticket on an app or whatever. People don't know that. And it sounds really basic, but letting them know that and encourage, it is a key part of it. So absolutely, it's all part of what needs to be communicated.
And I guess the shopping locally as well would feed into that.
Yeah.
And then we've got a question from Alistair again, that's any idea what the payback period might be for the GSHP system?
Oh, okay. Well, it would be interesting to know why you're asking that question. Can you is there another question?
Pop a little question in the box, Alistair.
Because the situation you've got here is you've got a building that needs a heating system that doesn't have one there already. So what are you actually comparing it to? So the other thing is that from a carbon point of view, how do you look at money as opposed to carbon? Are we thinking about the future financial implications of climate change? So I want to know why you're asking that question, the context of it. So I'm asking your question back.
I'll come back to Alistair at the end then. Simon's just asking, could we give an idea of approximately how much heat loss we think percentage-wise over irrelevant periods given through the chimney in any given room in a property with an open fire? So how much is lost basically through the chimney?
A lot. Okay, so when you've got if we think of a normal domestic situation, the amount of heat that's going to be lost, it is going to be governed by how tall the chimney is, how big the flue is, how windy it is outside, and how much colder it is outside compared to inside the building, and how leaky the building is, right? Now, if you put all that together, you can see it's not going to end up as one number, okay? But if I draw an example, so sad person that I am, I did do quite a lot of research into this. I have, if you're really interested, you can drop me a line and I can send you a report that a very accessible report that I did quite a long while ago, but it will give you some more background about it. But a basic model that I did as part of my research, think of a 3-bedroomed mid-terraced house. Okay, it's got 2 reception rooms and a kitchen downstairs, and sort of 3 rooms on the first floor, this hypothetical building has, but it's a mid-terrace. If it had 2 open flues of a normal size in the sort of the front room and the rear room, the living room and the dining room, the energy loss through the air moving in those 2 flues would more than offset the impact of external wall insulation, underfloor insulation, and loft insulation. Does that give you a context for how important it is? So we're talking about significant amounts, because basically, you know, it's going to be drawing air through the property, whether you want it or not. It's going to be a drain on whatever the main heating system is. I'm assuming in this instance that the heating is actually delivered to the building elsewhere, and the fireplace is used occasionally, maybe, or not used at all. But we're talking about really quite significant amount of energy loss, and actually it's relatively straightforward to do something with. So and before I started researching it, I assumed that people took basic measures to reduce the airflow. But what I rapidly realized was people don't. It's something that's overlooked because it doesn't appear on energy performance certificates. You could have a house with 5 open fireplaces and there will be no mention on the energy performance certificate that maybe you should think about sticking a bit of newspaper up the flue in order to reduce the airflow. So, and it is really overlooked. It's I still have difficulty understanding why it's not on EPCs, but it isn't, and it will never. It's not a recommendation on EPCs. So it's worthwhile looking at. And I'm more than, if I could talk about flues all day. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me directly on that, I can send further information about it, and I have reports that are available, or videos that talk specifically about it. So you'll be bored with it by the end of it, but it is really, really significant. And from a comfort point of view, that air that's disappearing up the flue is creating a draft through the building. Where you've got drafts, it means that you're going to feel discomfort, even with a high air temperature, 20, 21, 22 degrees. If there is a draft through that space, you will not feel comfortable. So you reach for the thermostat to increase it more. If you reduce that airflow, actually, you'll feel comfortable in a lower air temperature. So that's another sort of win side of it. So yeah, like I say, I could talk all day on it.
No, that's great. And there's lots of interest because we've got quite a lot of questions still coming in. So the next one on the list is, how do you feel the increase in attention to sustainability over the past few years has changed the balance between retrofit and conservation? And do you feel that we're more inclined to merge the old and the new when retrofitting in future?
Oh, absolutely. What's the name of the person?
Archie.
Archie. That is a great question, Archie. Right, bit of personal information here. Okay, so I did my master's at CAT sort of around 2010. Okay, and I was trying to look at, had anybody tested, air tightness tested existing buildings, because I could see that this was an area that wasn't being looked at, and I could find virtually no tests. And I was persuaded to go to a meeting. I shouldn't say it. Is there anybody from the SPAB on here?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. There could be.
Right. I was persuaded to go to a meeting at the SPAB, right? Like an open meeting. And I mentioned air tightness and older buildings. And I wasn't quite laughed out of the room, but there was loads of skepticism. The situation has changed completely, right? Everybody, it's a wonderful thing that we appreciate now that we can actually bring the two together. There are clearly limitations, right? And we need to protect that historic fabric, the stuff that can't be replaced. But we're seeing this merging and thinking, you know, so proactively about what we can do. So it is a wonderful time. I realise it's been brought about because of climate change, but yes, so dramatic change, you know, which in itself is such a positive step, you know, working within the constraints of the building. But yeah, really, really dramatic change, I feel.
Oh, that's really good. And then Eric's asking, probably maybe another little bit that's too great of detail for today, but he'd be interested to know more details about the heat pump installation, how large an output it is and how big an area it heats, etc. Just before you answer that one, Diane, there was a little bit in Karen's presentation about this as well. So if again, Eric, if you want to go and catch up on that one, there will be a little bit more detail about that in Karen's presentation.
Yeah. I mean, as a slight aside, nothing to do with the Landmark Trust, but interestingly, back to air tightness and buildings. If we think about heat pumps, you know, when you're calculating the size of installation that's required, clearly you take into account the fabric performance of the building and the air tightness of the building. In order to you know to get the specification right. I'm personally involved with you know, a student who's doing some master's research into actually the direct effect of air tightness in a building on the actual heat performance, not just like the obvious bit, but the not so obvious bit. And it's something that people haven't really looked into. So it's an interesting field, and clearly we need to move to low carbon heating on a wider basis, and heat pumps, whether that's ground source or air source, is the way that we're going to have to do it. So we really do need to understand generally our buildings better in order to make sure that the equipment performs. And I think one of the things we do suffer sometimes is that we don't know what the building is actually performing like, and maybe the heat pump then gets discredited a little, but maybe the issue is actually elsewhere, or potentially a combination of two. But understanding what the building is doing is a key part of working with that low carbon technology.
And then there's just a couple that are both a little bit similar that are on heat loss. So we've just got asked, I understand the issue of heat loss via the flue, but is the ventilation and airflow not beneficial for avoiding condensation as well?
It depends on what the level is. I mean, you have to look at it holistically. Yeah. So it depends on the general air tightness of the building. So you have to get that combination right. You know, at one extreme, you know, if we're thinking about, say, new buildings, what you've got, say, with the passive house side of things, is you've got buildings that are very airtight and the ventilation is delivered through a controlled system. You know, at the other end of things, you can have buildings that are very leaky and have lots of airflow through, but we need to view those in the context of potentially reducing their energy use. Those buildings are great if there isn't a requirement to heat them to sort of modern conditions, really, and or maybe if heating cost isn't an issue. But if what we're trying to do is to reduce if we're trying to heat the building and we're trying to reduce our impact on the environment, we need to think about where that energy loss is going. So there's a balance with making sure that the ventilation level is right, to maintain good indoor air quality and do what's right for the building, and without you know, minimum energy consequences. So my actual research topic was based around my original research topic was based around do older buildings actually need more ventilation than the newer buildings, so because of the moisture movement and everything else. And I can send you my thesis if you really want to read it, but the conclusion on pre-1900 houses on my case study was they don't actually need more ventilation, because it's actually the occupants that dominate the moisture within the building. So if you deal with what the occupants are producing, we're not looking at vast levels of ventilation for the building. There's going to be a little bit, but the occupancy pattern absolutely dominates the moisture characteristics of that building. So I can send you my thesis if you drop me a line, if you really want to read more about that.
Thanks, Diane. Well, we've just got 2 minutes left, so I know we've got a few questions that unfortunately I've not had a chance to answer. If you would like me to put them to Diane, I can do it in an email and then we can get an answer back to you. If you want to get in touch with Diane directly, I'm sure that she's more than happy for you to do that, if that's all right with you, Diane.
That's fine, yes, yeah.
Just the last thing is that Alistair did come back with an answer, and he said it was very expensive, I understand. So I realise a biomass system might not have been as suitable, but would this, for example, have been less expensive?
I think, again, thinking about how our views have changed in the last few years with biomass, you know, burning stuff maybe isn't great, and a few years ago we perhaps had a slightly different view, so thinking about the carbon side of it and thinking about what the sort of future implications are, I think has to be considered as a factor in that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Diane. We're pretty much bang on time. We've got 1 minute to go before the end. So I just want to say thank you very, very much for coming and talking to us all today. It's been really, really helpful. And obviously, the amount of questions that we've had, everybody's been really interested in your webinar. So thank you.
I'm happy to send, so drop me a line if you want the publications that I've mentioned. I'm more than happy to send them through to people if you just drop me an email.